Hello, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Indians. I'm your host, Jeff Eliis, currently of Locked On Indians, formerly of 24/7, before that Scout, and then before that Indians Baseball / Indians Prospect Insider, and then just about every Cleveland sports blog you've probably read at some point in time I appeared on. I want to take a quick second and say that today's show is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Today's show, we're going to talk about the home opener. We will dive into a bit of a mailbag, and we'll do some talk about just some kind of news that happened in and around baseball, possible some good news when it comes to the Indians and their ownership situation. I did want to start off and make sure Justin Latta, who was on the show last week, had a great tweet that I didn't realize this until he pointed it out, that today with Logan Allen starting the home opener, that is the first time a left-handed pitcher had started a home opener for Cleveland since Scott Lewis back in 2009. Former Ohio State pitcher Scott Lewis. Interesting. I had not thought about him in a few years. But I thought on the whole, when you're looking at this performance, strong performance by Allen. 5 innings. He goes the full 5 innings in this one. Not the full. He goes 5 innings. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the stats behind me here, scrolling down on my backup computer. But he goes 5 innings, 5 hits, 2 runs, both earned on 2 walks, 3 strikeouts, and the 1 home run. Both of his came on the home run. The only other run the Indians gave up was Whit Merrifield, who hit the home run, had a sac fly off Tristan McKenzie. You maybe want to see a few more strikeouts, but that's a strong performance by Allen. Only 74 pitches to get through those 5 innings. He did not want to come out. It's unfortunate that it was like 5 innings was Allen's max because they were having McKenzie piggyback him, who went 3 2/3, and then Karen Shaw came in for the final out. But he was set up to, at 74 pitches, there's a chance he could have gone 7, which is probably why he didn't want to come out of this one. Logan Allen has not had a lot of opportunities to pitch in the big leagues. He's been, he was a big prospect, top 100 guy when the Indians bounced around a bit. He had made his debut in 2019 with the Padres that year. This was just his, he had 4 starts. This was just his 5th start. He had pitched in 12 total games. This is his 5th major league start. Of course, he wanted to go longer, so you could understand some of his frustrations. McKenzie pitched pretty well. The strikeouts were there. The walks were also there, with 4 over 3 2/3 innings. The issue is just the offense. And yes, the offense was again unlucky. A lot of hard hit balls right at people. The numbers dictate that over the course of a full season, we will see those type of hits fall in. When you're hitting at like 96 or 100 plus miles an hour, those are the balls that more often than not turn to hits, the hard hit ones. Unfortunately for the Indians right now, they're not. And that was the story with the Detroit series. That is the story in this series. But we can't just sit there and blame bad luck. Danny, if you listen to Monday's podcast, I dug into Danny Duffy's historical data, and he's a guy who right-handers hit well. He is a borderline 5th starter against right-handers for his career. Very good against lefties. They loaded up on righties. This team is playing heavy platoons right now. They should be able to take advantage of Danny Duffy, and they didn't. They should have been able to do more than 3 hits and 4 walks. On the podcast, I'm always like, who reached base more than twice? Or who reached base twice or more in a game? Ahmed Rosario was it. That's the only guy. Franmil Reyes had a double. That's the only extra base hit. The offense looked futile. It looked not great. And that's been the story. And yes, it's the early going. And yes, it's 4 games. It's very early. A lot can change and happen. But when you are in this situation the team is in, where they traded away all the talent they have traded, people are looking for reasons to bash them, to not root for them. And when you're facing the weak teams, because Kansas City and Detroit are teams that are hoping to be 500, you're facing the weak teams in the division, you need to start out strong. And unfortunately, the offense just hasn't been there. We'll see if it can pick up. In this one, pitching's there again. It wasn't a first inning home run. It was a second inning home run, kind of staying close to what the theme is. And that's going to be part of the Indians staff this year. You look at their pitchers, you can go back to, Josh Tomlin is kind of the classic example for me when I'm thinking about this type of pitcher, where the Indians have never been afraid of guys with high home run rates. They're totally willing to throw a guy out there. Trevor Bauer, for a long time in Cleveland, was another guy who had a very high home run rate. And Bieber and Plesac, Savali, they're all probably going to have home run rates over 1. Logan Allen might as well. That's basically, it's limit the walks. You limit having guys on base when you give up that home run, which was, that was Josh Tomlin to a T. Now these other guys can miss bats, which was what Tomlin, outside of like 1 year, really couldn't do. That's the separator here. But that is definitely something that the Indians, as a developmental grouping and as they scout, they're not afraid of someone who's going to give up that long ball, who's going to give up some home runs. So that's what we're seeing. Almost every run, I feel like, has come across the plate has been a home run. It's got to be at least 80% in the early going, something to continue to track as the season progresses. Want to take a quick moment here and again talk about rockauto.com, one of our fantastic sponsors. I always tell people I'm not a car guy. That is not my skill set, but Rock Auto is nice for someone like me. Even if you're not someone who can go out and buy a part and replace it in your car, it allows me to know that I'm getting a good deal when I go somewhere and that I can find out which mechanics are trustworthy. Rock Auto gives you that type of power because you can compare and price shop. It's easy to navigate. It's easy to find the piece or part that is broken on your car. And when you go to the mechanic, you can see that you are getting a good deal. And if you are someone who can go and install a piece, fix something on your car, Rock Auto is even better. It's one central location, family owned, low overhead, pass the savings on to you, the consumer. And when you shop at rockauto.com, and little how'd you hear about us box, Locked On Indians, Locked On MLB, Locked On of some form, that's going to let them know that we sent you there and their advertising money is well spent. rockauto.com. It's just a great tool for you to have when it comes to your car. Let's also take this moment here and talk about Locked On Today, all the breaking news you need with host Peter Bukowski. Check out Locked On Today for all the news you need to know. I'm sure they'll talk about the Sam Darnold trade. Everyone's kind of in football season right now. And the Fernando Tatis injury. That's what I would bet on. Those are the two stories I could see leading. So if you're watching this video, you can see my name is at Jeff MLB Draft. When I was at Scouted 24/7, that was my focus. I do have to take a second. If you're not someone who necessarily pays attention to the draft, here's some additional information, breaking news, as it were. Jayden Hill was one of the most interesting arms in this class. LSU right-hander, extremely athletic, had been mostly a reliever, 2 potential plus pitches, fastball, slider, I want to say top of my head. Torn UCL, I want to say. He's going to need Tommy John. He's done for the year. He was a guy, if he had pitched well, would have been in that discussion with Leiter and Rocker. Yes, related to Tracy Rocker and then related to the Lighters. So good lines there for both those Vandy arms. He could have been in that group due to his athleticism and just his quick arm. I bring him up in this situation here because quick arm, supreme athlete. The Indians have drafted a few hurt players. Brady Aiken, I know, will come up. I always want to point out Brady Aiken's arm surgery, his arm issue was something that was the extreme. Like a lot of players are hurt. A lot of players get drafted who, have already had Tommy John or just had Tommy John and are going to miss the next year. That happens a lot. Brady Aiken is the only one where I heard people concerned, like massively concerned that this was one of those cases that a player was never going to come back the same. And honestly, Aiken never did come back the same. Before that injury, when he was the first overall pick to the Houston Astros, I think people always forget, like, the Houston Astros not signing Aiken, he got less money from the Indians than the Astros offered him. If he had taken that money from the Astros when he was the first overall pick, the Astros don't get Alex Bregman. That turned into Bregman for them. And that monetary savings with that and the Kyle Tucker pick allowed them to draft Daz Cameron, who then became the centerpiece of Justin Verlander. So in a lot of ways, Brady Aiken not signing really became the core of the Astros World Series wins. And it's kind of also interesting that, their top 2 picks were Aiken and Mark Appel. Mark Appel's trying to come back. So for all the talk of all their scouting greatness, they actually kind of whiffed at the top. But all this is just to say that was an odd situation. Indians fans are very familiar with it, but it was more of an extreme with Aiken. Hill could be a guy. The Cincinnati Reds would also be a team that makes a lot of sense. So Ohio for both. It's a big risk, big reward. But when you look at some guys like Daniel Espino, who they took a few years ago, Ethan Hankins, they took some guy. I mean, Hankins, there was talk that he was hurt and was going to need surgery. It didn't come together. And Espino's a guy who a lot of people think at some point, due to delivery, is going to have injury concerns. So Jayden Hill, like legitimately one of the top 10 players in this class, didn't get to see him start last year, barely got to see him start this year. Interesting arm, but just a name to know, something to keep in the back of your head. Other interesting news of the day that I did want to talk about before we get into the mailbag section is I wanted to talk about that Paul Dolan went on WTAM and said that, the club could allow a new investor to buy a stake larger than John Sherman's. Sherman, of course, is now the Royals owner. And since he sold his stake in the Indians to buy the Royals, the Indians' payroll has dropped about $100 million. We don't know how much Sherman owned. It's somewhere between 15 and 30%. Most think it was probably closer to a 30% ownership. So this is saying that the Dolan family, Paul Dolan in particular, who's is the owner of the Indians, is willing to sell more than 30% of the team. Now, if he's willing to sell more than 30%, whoever buys at a higher than 30% situation here is going to buy with something written in there where they can eventually buy the team. If you're buying 40%, you want control. If you're willing to spend the money to get a 40% ownership share, you want something that's going to say within the next 10 years, you get options to buy to become the majority owner. That's just the way it's going to work. I know we got the whole thing this offseason with the Dolans saying they've lost money over multiple years. And there's no doubt that probably every ownership group lost money in 2020. The big thing to remember is that the Indians were bought, I want to say, for close to somewhere in the 300 million range. Their valuation currently is over $1 billion. So it's not a bad return on investment for a team that's maybe 20 years of ownership, if that. So it's, it is a situation right now where the Indians payroll has gotten so low relative to the talent they've had. If you've listened to the series of me talking to all the other AL Central hosts, everyone just kind of goes, I was always shocked that they never went all in. Their big addition was Andrew Miller. Or the fact that when they got Jay Bruce, they were willing to pick up and pay for his entire contract so they didn't have to send a big prospect over. And they got him because the Yankees wanted the Mets to pick up some of the salary, and the Indians were willing to take all of Bruce's contract money in. I mean, those are really that, and I guess Edwin Encarnacion, which is the biggest signing in Indians history, just in terms of year-to-year monetary cost. When you're operating, when those are the big points, it does make it harder. You do have a much smaller margins for error, I should say. Of course, the whole thing is the reason that someone like when they have a situation where people come calling and want to hire people away from this front office, people don't want to go because they know that they know what the situation is. They know the lay of the land. They know that it's an ownership group that is completely hands off. So if you do lose that ownership group, there is potentially some negatives. I think getting a minority owner, though, is huge. And I think that's one of those things that we'll continue to see this story develop. You want to watch this story develop because there's no doubt that the loss of Sherman has had a massive effect on the Indians' ability to compete, has had a massive effect on what can be reinvested in the team. And getting someone, even if they could just get back to about that 30% ownership, I mean, that could be huge. You could look at almost double where the team's payroll is this year going forward, which all of a sudden that means you could be in worlds and situations. Listen, they're not signing Lindor. That contract is always one that's going to end up in one of the 5 major markets. That's just the way of a contract like that. I don't necessarily know if you could keep a Jose Ramirez, because let's be in fairness to that situation, but it does open the door where maybe someone like Shane Bieber, there's more attempts at locking him up to a long-term contract. It seemed like that never got off the ground this offseason. Maybe if there's a little bit more leeway and monetary flexibility when you add that minority owner back in, someone like Shane Bieber is then able to be kept in-house. Just an idea, just to point out why this is an important news story and something that needs to be tracked. I mean, honestly, getting the minority owner, getting that extra cash flow in the team is a bigger story than anything that's happened in the first week of baseball for the Cleveland Indians. It's 4 games. I know people out there like, but those are the games. Yeah, they're the games, and it is opening day, and it's great to have baseball back. But the effect of a cash inflow to this team with the management group that's in place and how well they do is going to have a much bigger impact than probably anything we've seen since the Lindor trade. This would be the biggest story since then. So it may not get the airtime, it may not get the runtime, but know this, be familiar with this. This is very important. And if you're an Indians fan, hope they find someone. I don't know who it could be. When I was doing those central talks with teams, I can't remember if it was on air or off air. We got into discussion about like, who are the rich people in Cleveland? Who are the rich people in Ohio who could conceivably invest? There's a part of me that's sad. I know people have their ups and downs with LeBron, but I know he has his own ties, and that's why I invest in the Red Sox. But he's the type of local person where that small percentage grouping would have been ideal. So just something else to keep in mind. One of those things that's definitely important to the future of this team. Let's take another quick break here. Talk about our sponsors that help keep all of our great content going on network. I talked about Bet Online yesterday when I was looking at the lines of the day, and I told everyone, that's a good over-under, showing how much I know about gambling and overall lines for 4.5, I think, for the Indians game. Now, 3 isn't bad because the Indians really should not have had 0. Let's look ahead to tomorrow's scores. Actually, the Indians don't play tomorrow. So let's see if I can get a jump a little bit further in the week, maybe, for the lines for baseball. Now, while the Indians don't play, for instance, Detroit with Casey Mize against the Minnesota Twins with Jay Happ, the total runs is 9 in that one. The Tigers getting a 1.5. That's an interesting combination. How about going over to the New York Yankees versus Baltimore Orioles, where you have Kremer versus Garrett Cole, and the Orioles are getting plus 1.5 runs, which makes sense. 8.5 for your total runs. Highest one, Luke Weaver of the Diamondbacks versus German Marquez of the Rockies at 10.5 runs. It's not a bad pitching matchup. That might be one that'd be intriguing to me. Point is, you can go find these lines for yourself. You can find eSports, blackjack, live betting, racebook, live casino, poker, all up here at the top. You can find so many different things. Go to betonline.ag today. Use the promo code LOCKEDON to get a 50% bonus on your first deposit. It's huge. 50% on your first deposit. That is over at betonline.ag, promo code LOCKEDON, to ensure that you get that 50% bonus. Go check it out for yourself today. And then one more note before we hop into this mailbag, that Locked On Fantasy Baseball, Scott Cullen runs that. If you are someone who's into fantasy and you want all that information that can help you win your league, make sure you're checking out the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast. It's information every day. Every day you're getting a who to look for, who's rising, who is going to help you win your league. So I asked for some mailbag questions to finish some things up on here. At Nolan Jones, SZN, someone who is a fan there. Ryan is his name, though. Is there any reason Tyvan Berklio is still on this coaching staff? I don't know how much of an impact hitting coaches honestly have. I feel like their job is to more help guys stay even keel and to spot something major. I don't think we've ever seen, like pitching coaches have a big impact. We see that with development. We see that there are some pitching coaches that certainly do help more than others and have more success. And there's been star pitching coaches, and you can probably think of a few names. can you name one star hitting coach? It just doesn't happen. It doesn't come to me. Like the hitting coach feels like a very low impact spot. Like the job is just to be available, to be aware, so you see big things, and to just make sure guys stay even keel. Ty is there because the organization knows him and Terry's comfortable with him. And yeah, I don't think, firing a hitting coach is going to have any effect. Like I said, tell me who's the best hitting coach in baseball. I have never gotten into that debate with anyone. I have never really talked about it. I don't think anyone knows that answer. At Topher Suspended, which is Topher Groupie, asks, how many shortstops start for the Cleveland baseball team next year? If you count Rosario, Chang, Freeman, Miller, Arias, Jimenez, etc. Now they're also going to have to add Brian Arcoyo, Aaron Bracco. The Bracho is more of a second baseman DH. They're going to have to add, there's going to be like 10 shortstops on the 40-man. If you listen to my podcast from last week where I talked about the 11 have-to-adds and the 5 other players who could put themselves in that discussion, Richie Palacios is another guy. They have so many shortstops. It behooves them, honestly, this season to make a few trades. Like if they can trade a few prospects for a proven player, they kind of need to consolidate. That was the word I could not think of last week, was consolidate talent. But that is something they need to do, or else they're going to lose multiple players in the Rule 5 draft. There's no way around that. They have so many players coming up. Rosario, we'll have to see. Like he is one of those guys, either he's going to hit well enough to show that like 2019 was his best, was the true thing where he's that hitter, or he's going to have some struggles with transitions and they're not going to have a great spot for him. And they might look to move on from him. Freeman is one of those, like, it's going to be a service time game. Yes, he has to get added to the 40-man this offseason, much like Nolan Jones had to be added at the end of last year. We'll still see when Nolan Jones gets called up. Freeman is probably going to spend most of this year in the upper minors, but he's not. He's one of those guys I don't think you see before June or July. And if they pick up Cesar Hernandez's option, they don't even really have a natural spot for him, so they could push that even further. Miller and Chang are going to compete for similar roles, just in terms of utility type. With Arias, he's probably further behind Freeman in development, but he's had to be added to the 40-man last offseason. And, obviously Jimenez is already there. Again, you've only got so many spots. They're trying to find ways to be creative. They could shift someone, eventually view it as like the third baseman of the future as well. If Jose Ramirez, I've said like next July 2022 is probably the window to consider trading him, with about 18 months left on the contract. So one of those guys could eventually shift over to third base. Cesar Hernandez, they could choose to pick up. I mean, it's a decent option, but they have so many players at this point that, like, normally I'd say just go ahead and pick it up, but they kind of need to just let the young guys play, and especially if you can then use that money to help another position somewhere, maybe get or something. That's all things to consider. But yeah, they have. You can never have too many shortstops. I always think back to when they fell short in the Josh Donaldson sweepstakes before he went to Toronto, and I mean Toronto wanted a top shortstop prospect, and that was Franklin Barreto, and it did not work out for him, and he ended up in Oakland. Of course he was in Oakland after that trade, but then they traded him for their like 2-month rental of Tommy La Stella last year. That's how far that prospect had fallen. And yeah, Oakland's trades, hasn't worked out well for them. We could, if I was an A's podcast, we could do so much on that. They've had some that have really worked out, but it's much like the Indians. It's never the star piece. It's never the centerpiece. It's always the secondary pieces that help them the most. DB Seiss, Andy, who I talk to often on here. It looks as if Karinchak won't be in line for many saves. It appears he is coming in during high leverage situations. Is Maton, Clase, or Whitgren in line if there's ever an opportunity to get a save? Well, the honest truth is If Clase and Karen Jock get saves, their arbitration is exponentially higher. When it comes time to pay players, saves is really the one thing that makes contracts a lot more expensive when it comes to relief pitchers. So for a team like the Indians, it behooves them to not make their young players closers. They're better off. I think it could be Maton because in that group, he's got better stuff than Whitgren. But they could go with one of those two guys. There could be someone else. They could eventually force their hand if no one's effective to go to one of the other players. I think Karen Chalk has done a nice job in those high leverage situations. Honestly, if they end up going with the young guys back there, I think it's more likely Class A just because of the high velocity to just throw him out there for one inning. Where Karen Chalk, you might try to get more than one out of him. I had a question about Brady Aiken. Like, is he out of baseball? He was at Driveline. He went to Driveline. That was the talk, and then haven't heard anything since. Another one from Andy. Given that Chang is playing first base against lefties, how good of a look are they truly going to get? I'm curious. I'm just going to quickly check and see that line there. I guess he just means how good of a look at Chang. They're going to see if he can hit lefties. If that can be it's clear that he is lining up to be more of a utility bat for them as a potential platoon bat, a guy who can play short, second, and third. There's value in that. I mean, he can now essentially play every spot on your infield. Maybe work on him, see if he can be, he's a good athlete. Maybe he could even play some corner outfield, give you a true bench bat that can pop in just about anywhere and be there to hit lefties. Always had good walk rates, always had good power numbers in the minors. I am all for that. At King Harris in Moneyball, the A's projections of their own runs scored and allowed were very accurate. So basically, they're able to predict how many runs they're going to give up and how many runs they were going to score. And that plus minus differential is shown to be a very good indicator of overall team success. I assume 20 years later, Cleveland can also be that accurate. And knowing that, what is the point of trotting out a team that's going down up with 78 wins in either playoffs nor a top draft pick? I don't think they're going to get 78 wins. I know it's been a relatively negative 4 games, but I've said I think they're going to be a potential wildcard team. Now, they might be closer to 2019 Indians, where they finished on the outside looking in, but you've got a player that one can make a strong case should have won the MVP, and you had a pitcher win the Triple Crown for all of baseball. You got to try. You're not going to get that level of high-end talent often. And they've got some young players they believe in, and you're just trusting that they can scout well and that the supplementary pieces like a Franmil Reyes that they've added through the years, when they went out and added Rosario and they brought back Hernandez, those guys are going to help the roster on the whole. And again, 4 games, very unlucky in those 4 games. Do not overreact. And the betting line, to go back to our sponsor, 81.5 games. So had them just about 500. They have not had a high pick since Clint Frazier. I want to say Naquin might have been like a 12th or 13th overall pick. And I guess Will Benson was like 11th or 12th as well in his draft year. But they had that whole stretch of high picks, and Frazier still isn't proven. Drew Pomeranz and he's finally found a role as a reliever. But you go through, the draft is a crapshoot. This isn't, I write on it a lot and spend a lot of time on it. And when it comes down to it, there's so much risk. I go back and I give myself credit because I had Alex Bregman as the number 2 player in that class. I had him higher than Dansby Swanson. I thought he was a better player. So I can pat myself on the back. Yeah. But then I had Brendan Rodgers, who's still yet to play in the big leagues with Colorado, as player 1. You don't get them all. Yeah, I had Cray as the number 1 player over Byron Buxton, but I also thought like JB Woodman was going to be a great, very good player for the Toronto Blue Jays. It's like he was a quarterback. He's finally putting it together. We don't even need to get into my Tristan Pompey love where that didn't come together. You hit, you miss with the baseball draft, especially those early picks. The Indians like to go ceiling, but you can get some similar high ceiling players kind of later in the draft. Ceiling is always kind of there in the first round. You can find ceiling. So they're okay being where they are. Honestly, the best thing that they have going for them is those competitive balance picks. Look at a second rounder this year. They got that extra first rounder last year, which turned into Tanner Burns. And it's more about the quantity than anything else. And they totally went with that approach the past few years, where they've almost entirely avoided the senior sign. They've gone for just players that they view as a high ceiling, or they view as strong ceiling types. They're not going to go out and sign someone they don't think can play in their system. And that's and then from Glenn Longwell 89, he asked that he hasn't had the benefit of actually seeing games, so it sounds like Naylor has been playing fairly well. Is the reason for optimism? Is he still looking like he did last year? He had that great catch. I'm trying to think if that was Saturday's game. I think it was Saturday's game. He's looked well. He's running. He's playing well out there. I don't think he's going to win any awards, but I think he's doing enough to play outfield and to not be a detriment to the team out there. He's probably better than Eddie Rosario. Like, honestly, like Rosario has been a negative defender for a while. Like, if you're looking to replace a spot, now Rosario has the much stronger arm between them. But yeah, I think Naylor's been fine. I think that is a situation that isn't really a concern so far. Small sample size, of course, should be noted. I have been Jeff Eliis. This has been the Locked On Indians podcast. I know my name is at Jeff MLB Draft. I know everyone's saying, where's the draft content? It's coming. I'm working my way through it. Get a little bit of it in the podcast as well. Baseball season is a lot of fun. I'm going to see my first game this weekend in person in over a year. University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin versus Youngstown State. So I'll get to see a Ohio squad in person on Friday. Again, thank everyone for listening, rating and reviewing, downloading daily. That helps our show grow. I have been Jeff Eliis, and for the next